On the 30th of April, 1943, a Spanish fisherman spotted something drifting in the shallows off the coast of Huelva in southern Spain. A body, dressed in a uniform, tangled in the tide. Just another casualty of a world at war, it seemed. A drowned officer washed ashore with the debris of a sinking. But chained to his wrist was a briefcase. And inside that briefcase were secrets that could change the course of the Second World War. Except the man in the water was not who his papers said he was. He had never served in the military he supposedly belonged to. He had, in fact, never served anywhere at all, because he was already dead before the war ever touched him. This is the story of a corpse who became a spy, a dead man who fooled Adolf Hitler and helped determine the fate of an entire continent. By the spring of 1943, the Allies controlled North Africa. The next move seemed obvious to everyone, including the Germans. Sicily. It was the logical stepping stone into occupied Europe, close enough to reach, large enough to matter. Winston Churchill himself is said to have remarked that anyone who wasn't a fool would know it was Sicily. The problem was, the enemy knew it too. British intelligence needed a way to convince Hitler's high command that the invasion was going elsewhere. Not to distract, but to divert. To pull German divisions away from the beaches where Allied troops would actually land. If Sicily could be disguised as a feint, if the real target could appear to be Sardinia and Greece instead, thousands of lives might be saved. The plan that emerged came from the 20 Committee, the shadowy British body overseeing deception operations, and drew on an idea first sketched years earlier in a memo of hypothetical espionage tricks. Two officers took the concept and built it into something real. Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of British intelligence and Lieutenant Commander Ewen Montagu, a barrister serving in naval intelligence. Their idea was audacious in its simplicity. Create a dead man, give him a full identity, a career, a fiancée, a family, even debt and a bad temper about his overdraft. Attach him to a fictitious set of top-secret documents suggesting the invasion would strike Sardinia and Greece, with Sicily merely a cover story. Then release his body into waters where the current would carry him to Spain. Spain was officially neutral in the war, but its government had close, sympathetic ties to Nazi Germany. British planners knew that if a body carrying sensitive documents washed ashore there, Spanish authorities would almost certainly share its contents with German intelligence before returning it, quietly and correctly, to the British. The neutrality of Spain became, in effect, the perfect postal service for a lie. What they needed first was a body. Not just any body, but one that could plausibly have drowned after an aircraft crash at sea, one whose family or origins could remain hidden from scrutiny, and one available quietly through medical channels without drawing attention. The man they found was named Glyndwr Michael. He was Welsh, homeless, and desperately poor. He died in London in 1943 after ingesting rat poison, a case widely believed at the time to have been an act of suicide, though the full circumstances of his final days remain, even now, not entirely certain. He had no family to ask questions. Nobody was looking for him. In a war where millions of young men were dying in uniform, Glyndwr Michael had never worn one. He became, in death, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. Cholmondeley and Montagu built the fiction with obsessive care. Martin needed to feel real, not just to a passing glance, but to trained intelligence officers determined to find the seams. They gave him identification cards, a photograph of a fictitious fiancée named Pam. Actually, a photo of a real clerk who worked in the department. Love letters, theater ticket stubs, an angry letter from his father, and a bill from a London clothier for a new shirt. They even placed a slightly worn key and loose change in his pockets, the small, unremarkable debris of an ordinary life. Inside the briefcase, chained to his wrist as though for security, they placed a letter from a senior British general to a commander in North Africa. Wrapped in official, believable language, the letter implied that the coming invasion would target Sardinia and the Greek Peloponnese. Sicily was mentioned too, but only as a smaller, diversionary target, a detail included specifically because they knew the Germans expected Sicily and would be suspicious if it were left out entirely. The body was placed aboard the submarine HMS Seraph, and on the 30th of April, off the coast of Huelva, released into the sea, dressed as an officer who had drowned after his plane went down. The tide, as planners hoped, carried him toward shore. What happened next unfolded almost exactly as British intelligence had gambled it would. Spanish fishermen recovered the body. Local authorities took possession of the briefcase, and, through channels British officials had anticipated, the documents found their way to German intelligence officers stationed in Spain before the case and its contents were returned to the British naval attaché. Crucially, examiners in Madrid appeared to have opened and resealed the letters, but did so in a manner meant to look untouched. British forensic experts back home, however, later determined from subtle physical evidence, the way certain fibers or seals had shifted, that the documents had indeed been read. That single detail was extraordinary. It meant the deception had worked exactly as intended, and had also confirmed that it worked, without the enemy realizing they'd been watched in return. German High Command, based on documentation and intelligence reports historians have since examined, took the Sardinia and Greece threat seriously. Adolf Hitler himself is recorded as having grown increasingly convinced that the Allied target lay in the eastern Mediterranean rather than Sicily. German forces were reinforced in Sardinia. Additional troops, including armored divisions, moved toward Greece. Naval assets shifted accordingly. Sicily, though not left undefended, received less reinforcement than it otherwise might have. On the 9th of July, 1943, Allied forces landed on Sicily. The invasion, though difficult and costly, succeeded in establishing a foothold that would eventually open the door to the invasion of mainland Italy. Historians broadly agree the deception operation, known as Operation Mincemeat, contributed meaningfully to easing that invasion, though disentangling its exact effect from other factors, weather, existing troop deployments, and battlefield decisions made in real time, is not simple. What we know with confidence comes from declassified British files, memoirs written by Montagu himself after the war, and post-war analysis of German military records. What remains harder to measure precisely is just how much German strategic thinking shifted because of the fake documents alone, versus the broader web of Allied deception efforts running simultaneously across the Mediterranean theater. Operation Mincemeat was not the only ruse in play. It was, however, one of the most audacious and among the best documented. There are questions that persist, some of them uncomfortable. Chief among them is the identity and fate of Glyndwr Michael himself. For decades after the war, his true name remained secret, hidden even from his own family, who had no idea the derelict, troubled man they'd lost had, in death, played a role in a continental war. It wasn't until 1998 that historian Roger Morgan uncovered documentation identifying Michael by name, allowing a fuller, though still incomplete, account of who he had been in life. Some have questioned the ethics of the operation itself, using the body of a vulnerable man without consent he could never have given as an instrument of war. It's a fair question, one the operation's architects never publicly grappled with in their own time, when secrecy made such reflection impossible, and when the war's demands left little space for it regardless. There's also the matter of exactly how much the Germans believed and for how long. Some historians argue Hitler's conviction about Sardinia and Greece was influenced by more than mincemeat alone, that existing German assumptions and other intelligence sources played a role too. Untangling cause from coincidence in the fog of wartime intelligence is never entirely clean. What is certain is this: a homeless man who died in obscurity, whose life ended in what appears to have been a moment of personal despair, was given, without his knowledge or consent, a fictional second life as a war hero. That fictional life helped convince the leadership of Nazi Germany to misplace its defenses at a critical moment in the war. Real soldiers, on real beaches, may have faced less resistance because of a man who never wore a uniform while he lived. Glyndwr Michael was eventually given a memorial. His grave, in Huelva, Spain, still bears the name William Martin, though a plaque now acknowledges his true identity beneath it, a quiet correction to a fiction that once mattered more than the truth. The story of Operation Mincemeat endures because it sits at an uneasy intersection between ingenuity and exploitation, between a plan brilliant enough to alter a war and an act carried out on the body of a man who had no voice in his own legacy. The documents are real. The Spanish recovery is real. The German troop movements are documented. But the moral weight of how it was done has never fully settled, and perhaps it isn't meant to. A dead man walked so soldiers could live. Whether that makes him a hero, a victim, or simply a tool of history is a question the record leaves for us to answer. If stories like this pull you into the strange, hidden corners of real history, subscribe to The True Unknown, where we keep uncovering the mysteries that history almost buried for good.